That's really what we're trying to do at Parakeeto, is trying to equip digital agencies is what we focus on. The framework and the technology and everything that we built, we believe applies to almost any service business. So, you could apply to professional services, you could apply to home services, but we're a small company. So the niche that we were born into was in the digital agency space, and it's kind of where we're known and we built authority over time. This is really our area of expertise. So we kind of have an unfair advantage in that our area of expertise is service delivery profitability. So we're very good at measuring, the profitability of our service delivery and designing our services such that they can be very profitable. We don't run with the model of kind of like a loss leader or, an acquisition cost to get people onto the technology. We actually use the services as a profit center. I think that's really important because that allows us to have a strong foundation to stand on.
All right, we've got a great guest today on the Second in Command podcast, a Canadian from Edmonton, Canada, named Ben Zittlau. Ben is the CTO and Chief Operating Officer of Parakeeto. They're a software company they build software for marketing agencies and digital agencies, creative agencies. Great platform, great product. He's going to talk a lot about his methodologies and systems thinking, his approach to actually building companies, the way that he talks about problem-centric thinking, the way that he gets his team to analyze problems and situations before he says no to their ideas or says yes to the ideas, and the same approach at working with customers. I think you'll like some of his methodologies and thought processes behind not only building the company, but also working with the clients that they have. We'll see you on the inside. You can also watch this episode on our Second in Command podcast YouTube channel. So Ben, welcome to the Second in Command podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to chatting with you today and to learning from you today. So why don't you start us off and just walk us through what Parakeeto is, what your business does, and kind of how you guys got to where you are today. And then I've got a lot to actually start asking you about, but why don't we just start off with letting everybody who's listening understand what you do?
Yeah, I'll try and keep this reasonably tight. So my education is in engineering, and I've been an entrepreneur now for 10 or 15 years. And the lens I bring to business is very much a systems lens. I view businesses as systems. And consequently, data is a big part of how I think about business and how I like to look at business. But there's a whole challenge of how to do something that is based more in reality than just throwing best guesses in a spreadsheet. That's really what we're trying to do at Parakeeto, is trying to equip digital agencies is what we focus on. So things like web development shops, marketing agencies, design agencies, and basically trying to equip them with data from the actual operations of their business, so they can get reports and get visibility into what's going on within the walls, and based on that, be able to run a more efficient shop, a more profitable shop, and often finding that 5 or 10% improvement that can be the difference between a pretty profitable business versus a business that's losing money. So that's what we focus on doing. And the business kind of has two sides. One of it is more service oriented, so consulting and kind of expertise. And then we have technology behind that to actually pull the data in, process the data, and generate reports so that the business owners can look at those reports.
It's interesting. Why did you select the agency world? Why is that where your client base is?
The business actually had a previous co-founder before me. So there's another CTO, which was a gentleman out of Boise, Idaho. And he had an agency and was having these problems that many agencies do to actually get this kind of visibility, and had the classic insight of, if I'm having this problem, other people are probably also having this problem. Why don't we try and build some software to address this problem? So that's kind of where his background came from. And then my business partner now, Marcel, got brought in to be his co-founder and kind of take on the CEO and the sales and marketing side of things. So that was the initial kind of origin story of the business, was it came out of that space. And where we are today is, the framework and the technology and everything that we built, we believe applies to almost any service business. So, you could apply to professional services, you could apply to home services, but, we're a small company. So the niche that we were born into was in the digital agency space, and it's kind of where we're known and we've built authority over time. So that's what we're focusing on today.
Interesting. Do you think it is the fact that you're in that space and you've built up the domain authority? Is that what allows you to be scaling a company that is in SaaS and is in consulting, but's based in like Prince Edward Island, Canada, which no one from outside of Canada has ever heard of? I've been there and it's incredible, but it's like a province in Eastern Canada that has like 500,000 people in it at best. And Edmonton, like two of the non-tech hubs, in the world, but you're running like a technology company there. Has that domain expertise given you the credibility to be able to run from there, or does anybody even care anymore where we're based?
One, in terms of location, I think we're still seeing things in flux and playing out. And the how important it is where you're based, there's certainly still brand value, and brand value to being out of San Francisco or Silicon Valley, or in the Canadian scene, maybe more Toronto, Ottawa, Vancouver. And so I think that side of things still matters. And then in terms of building a team and access to talent, that's an interesting challenge, being remote and again hybrid work, back to office. Exactly how that's going to play out, I think we're still seeing evolve over time. In terms of who we work with, though, like we work internationally, so like we do work out of Canada, but most of our work is out of the US, but we also do work out of Europe. We've worked with clients out of Australia. And yeah, we have pretty deep brand authority that we've built over 4 or 5 years, being present in the space, writing good content, being at events. And, my business partner on the front edge of that, more on the sales side, might have a bit of a different lens, but it really, on the customer acquisition side, it doesn't seem to matter. So it's like, maybe there's an advantage to saying that you're in one of those big places, we're a Silicon Valley based company. But I think once you're outside of that, it doesn't really act as a headwind or kind of a detriment in the way that maybe it used to in the past.
Yeah.
So much work's remote, right? You're getting on a Zoom call. It doesn't really matter where that Zoom call is coming from, as long as you got good internet.
It's interesting. That's my gut now as well, is that pre-COVID, it mattered. Pre-COVID, especially if you were going out to raise VC funding, venture capitalists wanted to go to a hub where they could probably leverage that. And I don't know why it just somehow made sense to them, but it feels like post-COVID, no one cares anymore. As long as you're getting the work done and you're efficient and you're scaling it. And then I guess for you guys, it actually strategically is pretty strong when a bunch of your expenses are in Canadian dollars, but a bunch of your revenues in US dollars. You're running a bit of an arbitrage opportunity at 72 cents to the dollar, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, as a Canadian entrepreneur, unfortunately, pretty early into the journey, came to the insight that if you're based in Canada, go after the U.S. market. It's just not worth going after the Canadian market. It's unfortunate, but the market, the U.S. market is 10 times the size, and then you get this currently very juicy exchange rate.
Yeah, California is bigger than all of Canada, so it kind of makes sense. What percentage of your revenues would be on the SaaS side of the business or the tech side of the business, and what percent would be on the consulting side? And how about on the margin? Like, what percentage of your gross margin would be on SaaS versus gross margin on the consulting side?
Man, that's a great question. It's tricky because things are very much in flux, and we're developing as a company. So the first 2 to 3 years of the business, we focused on being a SaaS company. So we were trying to be pure SaaS. We actually had 2 products that we fully took to market as pure SaaS products, and then didn't see a lot of traction and success in that. And then about 2 years ago, we basically shifted to a much more services-centric model, what we call technology-enabled services, where the service area to a customer is really the services, delivery. But behind that, we're always investing in technology to make that, the services being delivered more efficient, more effective. So we shifted that about 2 years ago. And that's really where we started to get a lot more traction, and, we're able to bring on the first team members and kind of get some, just cash flowing through the business. Mm-hmm. And then we're always investing that into the technology. So basically customers come in on the front edge, it's very service heavy. And then once a customer matures more, more of the value that they're receiving is from the actual platform and the software. In terms of revenue, off the top of my head, because I haven't looked at these numbers recently, I'd guess it's probably about half and half, where, in the goal is over time for the SaaS or kind of platform revenue to grow and become a larger piece of the pie. But
Sure.
currently it's probably somewhere between a third and a half. Margin is tricky. This gets me, I have a whole rant about SaaS margin because that's my background is I started in SaaS and web entrepreneurship for about a decade. We kind of kid ourselves in terms of gross margin in SaaS. We're like, oh, my servers cost me $3,000 a month and I've got, $500,000. So my gross margin's, 99%. But the reality is in SaaS is built into those subscription fees is an assumption that first of all, you're supporting customers. So you've, coaching, support teams, all those operational costs.
Yeah.
But also that you're continuing to invest into the product.
Right.
So you can't just, discount your engineering costs and hide them in some corner, which is often what's happening when you're talking about SaaS gross margin. So anyways, in terms of margin, our margins on our service deliveries is quite strong. And then on the platform side, they're really strong, but a lot of that is because I'm the only engineering resource in the company right now. And I currently come very cheap.
Yeah. So you've got, your gross margin on SaaS might be high, but your OpEx on SaaS is expensive. Your gross margin on the consulting might be low, but your OpEx is fixed and is fairly low. It's interesting. I think that for you guys, from my kind of layman's understanding, the software side of the business is probably where your strong lifetime value of the customer is and where your multiples are going to come from. And your consulting is really your cost of acquisition side, where you bring them in and teach them the software and then you kind of keep them forever. It sounds like it's very similar in a way to a lot of the operating systems like, 90.io or the EOS software, where companies need to learn an operating system. They learn the operating system, they adopt the technology, they start operating their business from the technology. They no longer need any coaching, but now they're so addicted to the technology that you've got them for 10 years. Is that kind of your play?
I'll actually say no. In our model, we don't do service business that isn't highly profitable. This is really our area of expertise. So we kind of have an unfair advantage in that our area of expertise is service delivery profitability. So we're very good at measuring, the profitability of our service delivery and designing our services such that they can be very profitable. And what actually happens is we use the profitability of our services to fund the R&D, to feed into the technology that actually then in turn makes our services even more profitable, which, creates this, virtuous cycle of that profitability feedback into it. So we don't run with the model of kind of use services as, like a loss leader or, an acquisition cost to get people onto the technology. We actually use the services as a profit center. I think that's really important because that allows us to have a strong foundation to stand on. Even as we're continuing to evolve our technology, trying to figure out retention, trying to figure out, how to evolve that over time, we're standing on a strong foundation of a profitable services businesses that we're, building the technology behind. And then of course, all the upside of the technical platform and, being able to minimize the costs of supporting a customer on that technology are the long-term, plan and the long-term vision. But, we don't need that to subsidize the services business. And in fact, that, the services business actually funds those investments.
Does your software work outside of the marketing agency world? Does it work for PR agencies and, strategy or consulting? Or is it so firmly entrenched in marketing that it doesn't work outside of that? Do you have line extension later? And there's no way you're even touching, saturation in the market. The market's just huge, right?
Exactly. So our model, so the horrible brand that we slapped on it was Parakeeto Way, which was an accidental branding that, is one of these classic things where we were just at a strategic offsite and just talking about it. And so we called it the Parakeeto Way at the time. And then it's what we still call it today. We need to rebrand it. Anyways, our framework is really a framework for modeling a services business. So all our concepts and definitions, things like how do you measure utilization? How do you define that? How do you measure, we don't use gross margin, we use delivery margin. Well, what is delivery margin? How does that differ from gross margin? All those ideas apply to any service business. We don't go looking for that work, but we've had some of those opportunities come in through the pipeline. And often we'll try them. We'll work with the customer if it looks like it might be a good fit, even if they're outside of our box, because it gives an opportunity to test and see, well, how does this apply, if we're kind of outside of our sweet spot. And we've actually had really good success with that. So the focus on our market is far more about the marketing and sales, building authority, building a pipeline. But in terms of our actual core concepts, in terms of our technology, that's all very industry agnostic. And there's, I think, a lot of opportunity down the road to, extend it to other spaces or, who knows, license the technology to other verticals. But yeah, we've got time. It's not something that we're in a big rush to do. As you mentioned, the agency space is massive. We've got a long way to go to saturate.
One of the things that I always hear from salespeople that are in the engineering or software space is, if the product did X, Y, Z, I could sell it. And from the customers, you get the customers saying, oh, if it did X, Y, Z, we would buy it. How do you know how to filter those? And if you're building more functionality in for one company or for one salesperson, how do you charge for that? Can you walk us through that decision matrix?
Yeah. So first of all, anyone in my company, my business partner or any of our employees, one of the things they hear from me all the time is problem-centric thinking. This is something I rail on over and over and over again. Marcel, my business partner, has gotten very good at it, after years and years and years of me railing on it. If we get a situation where we get on a call with the customer and they're saying, they need something or, there's some idea internally about something we need, the first question always is like, well, what problem? What's the problem that is meant to solve? The belief that the customers are usually right about their problems, they're usually wrong about their solutions. So, they're asking for something, there's there hopefully is some kind of problem behind it. And if we just build understanding of the problems in our space, then we can think far more holistically and far more strategically about, which solutions make sense for us to build. Are there ways to solve those problems in manual ways or by throwing man hours at it instead of building technology? So problem-centric thinking for us is huge. Basically trying to figure out what the problem is and then asking the question of how broad is this problem? So if we understand what the problem is this something that's really unique because this customer's in some Eastern European country that has a certain way of maybe doing taxes that no one else does? You get interesting things like one of the ones that we haven't taken on, but you see is like multiple currency support. So businesses that are operating across multiple currency domains. And it's like, well, okay, how common? Then we can kind of start thinking of it through that lens. And one of the kind of two-sided decision-making things, I think, as an early stage business and potentially as any stage business, is this really tricky question of when are you trying to broaden the net? So if you're looking at your market, your niche, and it's like, let's say multiple currency support as an example. So we don't do that right now. So basically, if there's a agency that operates across multiple currencies, we can't support that. So they're outside of who we can serve. It doesn't make sense for us to broaden that net. So to do that work, to broaden what our product does so it can support that. Or are we better off investing more into the people that we are already successful for? And I think especially in the early days, there's this sense of we just need to broaden the product. We need to broaden the product. You broaden the product. And that's how we're going to get to success. But often what ends up happening is you just end up with such a complex, diluted, messy, uncohesive product that's not really useful for anyone. So it's like one of these leaps of faith to say okay, who is our customer? And is that, is there enough market there? That's important, but who is the customer? And then let's focus on making it better for that customer. Be deliberate when you're going to widen that net. So don't do that just through, individual feature requests going okay, is this us, looking at broadening the market, broadening our niche? Let's do that strategically and deliberately. Is this the right niche to go after if we're going to do that? Because another thing that I harp on is usually that one feature request. If the customer's not fit for your product and they come in and they want one thing, you build that one thing, they're going to want something else. And then they're going to want something else, they're going to want something else. So you end up just chasing them. On the side of charging for it, which was the other side of it, I was at a conference talk once and someone was talking about this. And basically they were saying never do custom development for a customer because it's the worst decision we also made. But it was also critical. The money that we got from doing it was also critical for building the business. And we went through exactly the same thing. We had an early client that basically funded the business for the first few years. And it was all custom, all one off. And it was a huge distraction. There'd be points where it was like 3/4 of my time was going to doing custom development for a single customer. Just even just the amount of internal time, discussion, stress that went to this one customer.
Sure.
But we learned a lot. It got a lot of money in the door. Like the one rule of thumb I have for that is to price it such that you feel equivalently about either decision. So price it such that if the customer walks away, you're okay with them walking away, but also if they agree, they're paying you so much that you're also okay with it.
Yeah.
And if you haven't priced it there where when they say yes, you're okay with it because it's paying so damn much money, increase the price. And maybe they say no, but you saved yourself this massive headache. But at least if they say yes, it is worth your time.
Yeah, it's a good filter. I like the thought process behind it as well. I'm curious how you say no to your team. Do you just walk them back through that kind of problem-centric thinking or the model and say, this is why we're saying no? I think I had a mentor years ago who said that true leadership is the ability to say no more often than we say yes. And it's hard when we're now working with Gen Z and the last half of Gen Y that grew up in the whole participation ribbon. Congratulations, you've got your 12th place ribbon. No one ever said no to them before. How do we say no in the workplace more? Is it by using a model?
I had employees who was working for me at one point, really smart kid, really promising, Gen Z or young guy. He was really frustrated because, he's reading the blogs, listening to the podcasts, and, getting the ideas and things that he knows, the things that people should be doing, that the company should be doing. And he's really frustrated because he was like telling people the things to do and he was getting no's. And I'm going, well, like the knowing what to do is the easy part, but like knowing how to influence people, becoming that, that change agent and developing that skill set of, how to get people on board, how to understand your stakeholders, what their priorities are, what their goals are, and align things. That's the much more powerful skill and the much harder skill to develop. So that's one thing is like, first of all, like if someone wants something, it's like, if other people are not convinced, you have to take ownership of how understanding how they're going to make their decisions and influencing them. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is I always like to share context. I'm very big on trying to dump as much technical context, history, business context, goals, vision. The trick is a lot of time people just aren't interested in the full unabridged version of the answer to the question. But on the other hand, they also often don't just want the no.
Right. Yeah.
So, that's something that I'm still working on is trying to get better at figuring out which degree of answer, where on that spectrum to be answering a question from. And that's still a learning process for me. Like at one point in my career, it was just a no. And then I used to use this phrase. I don't use it as much, but it used to be everything's a question of cost or the laws of physics. That was one answer I would give.
I created something a few years ago for our COO Alliance, and I called it a decision filter. And the basic idea is come to me with your idea, but then you run your idea through the filter before you pitch me on it. And it's kind of like, what are the best case scenarios? What are the outputs going to be? What's the amount of time involved? What's the amount of people involved? How much money do we have to contribute? What's the ROI of those three things? And then you show me why we're actually doing this. And often people will come in, they run their idea through the filter and they say no before I even get a chance to.
Yeah.
Because they
just won't bother because it's so much work. Like this is, I call it the couldn't we just, or couldn't you just? This is both a thing from customers as well as an internal thing. Like, oh, couldn't we just do this? Couldn't we just use this tool? Tools. Oh my God. Like, oh, I found this tool. Couldn't we just use this? And it's like, okay, are you asking me to spend the 15 hours it's going to take me to fully research this tool? Is this the question that you're asking me? Is that the most important thing for me to do right now is drop the other priorities I'm working on?
Right.
And fully, because there's, of course, especially today, there's new tools and technologies coming out way faster than anyone could evaluate them. So that's, Yeah, sometimes I get frustrated with that. The couldn't you just or
If
couldn't
you
you
just,
just?
how do you go about evaluating all the different tools and kind of parts of the tech stack? How do you, as a company, evaluate those?
Ultimately, you have to build something. Like that's really the like I don't know if you're familiar with the tool called Retool. But it's one of these like kind of no code UI builder. It's actually a really, really impressive tool. It's much more powerful than I expected it to be and has all kinds of great little UI components that you can stick together. And I was trying to use it to build kind of a prototype customer UI. Again, my first evaluation was looking really promising the first hour or two. And then, I start trying to actually build something for real. And then you start hitting all these edge cases, the little ways in which it doesn't quite work for the problem space. And then I'm going to get on calls with their solution engineers and, trying things in different ways. And, the overall evaluation process there is probably, 20, 25 hours of work before finally arriving at the decision that like, it just wasn't worth it. So, in 20 or 25 hours of my time, I can build quite a bit. And you always want to be careful of that, reinventing the wheel and, build versus buy. But, if I build something, I know the limitations of it. I know the constraints. I know the bounds. So something needs to be pretty compelling, just in terms of the initial research. And this is one of these tough things too, is like, again, I'm 15 years into my career in software at this point. At a previous job, at a previous life, my role there was the chief architect of the company. So I did a lot of this kind of technology evaluation. That's one of the skills I think you develop, kind of on the architect side is that, to look at a technology. And really the key question I like to look at when I'm looking at kind of any tool or technology is, what problem is this intended to solve? I'm a big believer in using things for the thing they're meant to be used for. And unless it's like clearly such a tight fit to the problem I'm looking to solve, unless like I'm reading their, the design philosophy, whatever, and I'm just like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. If there's not that kind of tight alignment, chances are it's actually just not going to be worth it.
You actually prefer to build versus to buy or plug in something that's free.
Oh yeah, especially if it's free. Man, free is dangerous because, especially these days, because things tend to not stay free.
Right.
There was a time 10 years ago.
Now, there was a time when free was free for 3 years. Now it's free until you're addicted to 10 days later, and then you're sucked into their.
And they come in and they'll change the limits. They'll change the pricing structure.
Yeah.
Companies used to be far more resistant to do that, but like now the chances that like you're gonna like build this platform is like a key piece of your product or something, and then 3 months later they come to you and like, oh yeah, now this is going to cost you $500 a month. And maybe that's fine. Maybe that makes sense. I'm very wary of free.
So you came into the company as a co-founder and as the second in command. You've got a CEO who is a co-founder. How did you decide the roles and responsibilities that you would each have? I mean, it's pretty clear on the technical side why you're playing in that world. So, and then what's it like being a co-founder of a company? What are some of the challenges and struggles you had in getting to where you are?
First of all, I'm a big believer in having a co-founder. That's what I've done pretty much through my whole career. And it really helps bridge, the loneliness of entrepreneurship. In this case, in the case of Parakeeto, the split of responsibilities was actually pretty easy because we have very complementary interests and skill sets. It's not by accident. I put a lot of work into who I choose to work with, and we put work into that early in the process. But we're very fortunate in that we have very similar values, a very good value alignment, very good goal alignment, and very complementary skills. That was actually, pretty easy to draw those lines at the start. And then the one kind of point of contention is like as a 2-person, co-founding group, which also I really like. 3 people is dangerous, which is a whole other conversation. But what about when you disagree? And, that's an explicit conversation we have. I think all co-founders should, again, what is the decision-making tree? And effectively, if we disagree and it's in either of our clear areas of ownership, then the person who owns that area, like if it's a technology decision or a product decision and we disagree, then, I'll get the ultimate trump card If it's like a sales or marketing decision, he will. And then ultimately, if it doesn't fit under that, our decision is the CEO gets the trump card. So like at the end of the day, if we don't have any other way to resolve a disagreement, then he's going to get to make that decision. And I agree to that. I think there's a different degree of responsibility of being the CEO, the number one, the person who's, ultimately going to be responsible for everything in the organization. So we're 5 full-time, including the founder. So we have 3 full-time, and then we've got a handful of contractors that do, various things for us. So, mostly on the sales and marketing side, but in a few different places in the business.
And how are you able to stay so lean? I mean, so many companies tend to kind of bloat at those early stages. You guys are already up, you're running, you've got proof of concept, you've got good revenue and customer base. How are you able to stay so lean?
Man, it's another question. There's a lot of pieces underneath. So one thing is we ran this business with just the 2 of us as the only employees, even though we weren't even technically employees because we weren't paying ourselves for years. And it was really just trying to find, the point of leverage, the point of traction before scaling things up. We evolved how we thought about that, how we worked about that. But that was kind of like the initial strategy was to stay very lean, have all the agility that comes with being lean, of course, of the reduced costs that comes with that. And then for us as a company today, we're very deliberate and diligent about looking at our forecast. So, planning out where we think the business is going to be, how much business we're going to have coming in, how much capacity we need to serve that. And we use a lot of that to base our hiring decisions. So our hiring decisions are very deliberate and targeted at, where we need them to target. So that certainly helps as well. But the flip side of it is, sometimes I think if anything, we're too conservative. It's one of these things that, you always have to play with, especially in the uncertainty of an early stage company and a startup is, how aggressively do you want to make bets? And especially often when those bets involve cash and you only have so much cash. But there's 2 ways that you leave money on the table. And one way, you leave money on the table is by, not going after the opportunity aggressively enough. You could be further along, and time is expensive. So even as lean as we are, every month, 2 months, 3 months that we go slower than we could be going, that's a lot of, opportunity costs.
Yeah.
So we're playing with all the time. And again, in our kind of comfort way of running the business is very disciplined, very cash efficient. So often we have to push ourselves to go a little bit more aggressively and deploy a little bit more capital, put yourself out there. And then be forgiving to ourselves when we make mistakes that end up costing a lot of money. Like it's easy to go like, shit, we wasted $30,000 on hiring that employee that we shouldn't have hired. That's really easy to blame yourself for. And what's less clear to see is like, shit, we could have made $30,000 more revenue if we had moved a bit more aggressively. That's less apparent, less transparent.
Right. That's interesting. Those are really interesting insights actually for leadership teams to kind of debrief with each other on. You're right, because it is very easy to blame yourself for mistakes. It's not very easy to blame yourself for missed opportunities that you're not even considering or thinking about.
Yeah.
So I want you to go back to the 22-year-old Ben and give yourself some advice. What advice would you give the 21 or 22-year-old who's just starting out in your career that to be true today?
Okay. One thing is in my career, I was always biasing towards equity. So when I was evaluating opportunities, I always wanted the long-term upside. And, my vision of that was I was playing the long game. It's like, I don't want to just earn a salary. I want financial freedom. I want that upside. I want to see the upside of the things I'm investing my energy into. I believe I dramatically over-indexed for equity. The reality is, and like I've actually had some pretty good luck in the overall spectrum of how those things can go. But equity, especially in early stage private companies, has such a long and uncertain path to liquidity. So like you're an early stage employee and you get 5%, in a new startup. Even if that startup becomes a unicorn, it gets funding, it goes series A, B, C, D, it gets to IPO and you get liquidity. That could be 15 years down the road. So in the meantime, like in theory, you have all this wealth, but you can't touch it. It's monopoly money until liquidity happens, where there's a lot of opportunities that, drive cash flow much earlier. And, cash is king. So just in terms of utility money, what's better, having 3 million in the bank or having like this theoretical 30 million of net worth that you may or may never actually get, liquidity on. And that company could go, it could go WeWork, right? You could be, sitting here with, these shares that are, I don't know, put them up on the wall or something because they're not worth anything else. So that's one thing that I think I did kind of wrong in my path, is not pursuing just a little bit more liquidity, a little bit more cash in the bank.
It's interesting. If I go back to kind of the 2000, 2001 implosion of the NASDAQ, where the NASDAQ dropped by 78%, there was an entire wave prior to that from 95 to 2000 where everybody wanted equity in lieu of compensation. When the NASDAQ blew apart, everybody wanted equity as well as compensation. It was really interesting to watch people go from, they recognized that equity was just a bet, and it really wasn't a sure thing anymore.
And like, again, even when things go well, like this is just kind of like a general portfolio wealth principle. You end up in the situation where so much of your net worth is in a single asset. No matter what, that's always a bad idea. Even if you have the best leadership, the smartest people, the best technology, something can happen, like some, Google or Amazon come into your space, some new disruptive technology emerges, it gets banned by the government. Like so many things outside of your control could happen. So like this is another of these things where you see these, people working at these tech companies and they're making great money, but then they're also getting these stock plans, and then they're leaving, like sell your stock. Like if so much of your livelihood, your income is based on this one company, get as much that you can out of it, sell that stock, buy something else, it's crazy.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of people who all of a sudden, even as entrepreneurs, keep doubling down on the bet that their equity will be worth something and it's not really there. All right, Ben Zittlau, the CTO of Parakeeto, thanks so much for sharing with us on the Second Command podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
We have a team of full-time people that are all former senior executive level people. They have been VP of marketing or higher in operating companies, meaning we're not typical consultants, seasoned leaders responsible in their companies, reporting to the CEO and responsible for getting growth in the company.